Welcome to this explainer. Think about this for a second. Every single night, more than 8 billion people on Earth willingly entered this deeply strange state. We literally become completely paralyzed, drift through these wild, vivid hallucinations for hours, and then we wake up, usually forgetting almost the entire thing. When you say it out loud, it sounds like a massive evolutionary vulnerability, right? But, as we're going to explore today, this nightly loss of control is actually an absolute superpower. To give you an idea of just how powerful this state is, consider Paul McCartney. He famously woke up one morning with the legendary song Yesterday just fully formed in his head. And he is definitely not the only one. Way back in 1862, there was this frustrated chemist who fell asleep and literally dreamed of snakes biting their own tails. That bizarre image suddenly gave him the answer to the chemical structure of benzene. It was a real game changer that completely altered modern chemistry. It just brilliantly shows us how the sleeping brain can actually solve complex problems by tossing its usual logic straight out the window.
So that brings us to the big question we're tackling today. Why exactly does the brain force us to hallucinate every single night? Why do we have to endure this weird, chaotic mix of distorted memories and totally irrational worlds just to function normally the next day? What is the point of it all?
Well, here's our roadmap to figure it out. First, we'll look at the dream superpower. Then we'll step inside the sleeping brain. After that, we'll go from gods to hidden desires to see how our ancestors guessed at this stuff, followed by 5 scientific dream theories. And finally, we'll wrap up with the brain screensaver. Okay, part 1, the dream superpower, unlocking nightly mysteries. Let's rewind the clock a little bit to see exactly how this whole mystery was first cracked open. Believe it or not, up until 1952, scientists honestly thought the brain just shut off at night, like flipping off a light switch. But then, a researcher named Eugene Asorinsky hooked some electrodes up to his volunteers and made a totally shocking discovery. After a few hours of deep sleep, their brains suddenly lit up. The brain waves just went completely wild, looking exactly as if they were awake and, solving advanced calculus. And underneath their closed eyelids, their eyes were darting rapidly back and forth. He had just discovered REM sleep, or rapid eye movement.
Moving on to Section 2, inside the sleeping brain, the 4 biological changes. Let's really break down the actual mechanical reality of what's happening inside your skull during REM.
First up, we've got complete paralysis. During REM, your brainstem actively sends out these powerful chemical signals that literally lock down your major muscles. And honestly, this is a brilliant safety mechanism from nature. Without it, you'd be acting out your dreams. You might accidentally swing your arm and punch your partner while dreaming you're in a high-stakes MMA fight. So yeah, it totally stops your dreams from turning into real-life disasters. Second is the realistic hallucination phase. During this time, your visual cortex lights up like a Christmas tree, generating these incredibly bright, vivid images. In fact, seen with your imagination in this state can actually feel sharper, way more colorful, and unbelievably more real to your brain than your actual waking life. The third change is the total, utter disappearance of logic. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for reasoning, judgment, and self-control, it basically just powers down. It goes offline. This is exactly why riding a giant chicken to go buy bubble tea feels perfectly normal and completely reasonable while you're asleep. You literally don't even question it until you wake up. And the fourth change is the memory wipe. The chemicals you need to actually form long-term memories, specifically norepinephrine, they just plummet to incredibly low levels. It's kind of like your brain is looking at all this illogical, crazy stuff happening in your dream and just saying, yeah, we definitely don't need to save this to the hard drive. Just delete it. And that is exactly why your dreams usually fade away just 10 minutes after you open your eyes.
Now, if we map this out, we get this 90-minute sleep cycle roller coaster. We ride this coaster about 4 to 6 times every single night. You drop from light sleep down into deep NREM 3 sleep, which is where delta waves take over to do vital deep tissue repair and boost your immune system. Then, once the physical body is patched up, the brain shoots back up for some REM entertainment. Early in the night, it's all about physical repair, but as morning approaches, those REM stages get longer and longer, which explains why your absolute most intense cinematic dreams always seem to happen right before your alarm clock ruins everything.
All right, Section 3, gods to hidden desires, historical guesswork. Because, before we had fMRI scanners and high-tech electrodes, humanity still had to explain this nightly movie theater in our heads.
Historically speaking, people had some pretty wild ideas. The ancient Egyptians, for example, believed dreams were literal, direct fate forecasts from the gods. They even built special sleep temples.
Like if you dreamed of peeing into the Nile, hey, congratulations, they thought that meant you were getting a thriving crop season. Fast forward to the early 20th century, and you have Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung bringing dreams back into the human mind. Freud famously called dreams the royal road to the unconscious. He thought they were a safe space for our repressed, hidden, and frankly taboo desires to act out, just encoded in bizarre symbols so our waking selves wouldn't be too mortified.
Which brings us to Section 4, 5 Scientific Dream Theories, Survival to Creativity. Modern brain imaging forced us to toss Freud's ideas aside and ask a much more brutally practical question: why did evolution actually keep this risky, energy-draining mechanism?
Well, the first big modern theory is activation synthesis. This basically suggests your brain is just desperately trying to find patterns in total chaos. Your brainstem is firing off all these random electrical signals to the cortex, kind of like a toddler just randomly flipping light switches on and off. The cortex panics at the mess, scrambles to stitch all these random signals together into some sort of cohesive story, and boom, a completely crazy dream is born.
The second theory, and probably the most widely supported one today, is memory consolidation. Think of dreams as your brain's ultimate save button. Throughout the day, you're just collecting tons and tons of information. So at night, your brain acts like a diligent librarian, sorting through this massive, messy pile of books, deciding what's actually important enough to store in long-term memory and what should just be tossed in the trash.
There was actually this fantastic 2010 experiment that proves this in action. They had volunteers practice navigating a really complex 3D maze. The group that took a nap and reported actually dreaming about the maze, they solved it so much faster later on. It practically proved that dreaming about a skill means your brain is actively practicing and leveling up that skill in the background while you're snoozing. How cool is that?
Then we have theories 3 and 4, which are all about simulation. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that dreams, and specifically nightmares, are basically a built-in virtual reality training room. They give us a totally safe space to rehearse for survival and practice dealing with emotional conflicts.
So back in the day, this allowed our ancestors to practice real, physical survival responses, like, say, outrunning a hungry saber-toothed tiger. Now, obviously, we aren't running from tigers much these days, but we are terrified of social judgment. So instead, our brains have us practice surviving the absolute panic of realizing we forgot to wear pants during a public speech, or maybe a totally disastrous date. By safely living out these nightmare scenarios in bed, we fast-track our reflexes and process emotional panic, making us way better equipped to handle the real world.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the brain's screensaver, a turf war. This last theory introduces a terrifyingly practical reality about the physical real estate inside your head. Think about this time frame, 40 to 60 minutes. That is the exact amount of time it takes for your other senses, like hearing and touch, to actually start invading and taking over your visual cortex if you sit in complete pitch-black darkness. It's all because of neuroplasticity. Basically, your brain regions are constantly competing for territory, kind of like rival countries on a map.
Because of that intense neuroplasticity, neuroscientist David Eagleman proposed a defensive activation theory. Think about it. Our ancestors slept in total darkness for 8 to 10 hours a night. That made the visual cortex incredibly vulnerable to being conquered by the other senses. So, Eagleman suggests dreams are a literal biological screensaver. Every 90 minutes, the brainstem just blasts visual images into the cortex for no other reason than to keep it busy and hold its territory in this brutal neurological turf war. We might literally be dreaming just to protect our ability to see.
Okay, so pulling it all together, the really crucial point here is that science actually believes all of these theories are correct at the same time. Evolution is just incredibly good at making the most out of what it has. So what likely started out as a simple territorial defense mechanism, a screensaver to protect our vision, got beautifully repurposed over millions of years. Our brain uses that exact same nightly activation to clean up our memories, process our social anxieties, simulate survival threats, and unleash boundary-free creativity to, write hit songs and solve complex chemistry problems.
It is just deeply fascinating to me that humanity can photograph black holes millions of light years away, yet we still can't entirely agree on the full mechanics of this internal universe we all visit every single night. So, as you go to sleep tonight and you feel your body finally go completely still, ask yourself, what wild, rule-breaking masterpiece is your brain going to conjure up next in your own private movie theater? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and sweet dreams.